Welcome back. Let's do this.
What does Trump's release of JFK assassination documents reveal about government secrecy? Explore the implications of releasing such sensitive documents and what they might say about government transparency and accountability. In 2017, President Donald Trump made a groundbreaking decision that would resonate through the annals of American history. After decades of speculation, conspiracy theories, and a relentless pursuit of truth, Trump authorized the release of thousands of classified documents surrounding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The public had been waiting for this moment ever since the 1992 JFK Records Act had mandated the full release of all records related to Kennedy's assassination in Dallas in 1963. However, the journey to that moment was fraught with secrecy, political calculations, and national security concerns, revealing the deeper layers of government transparency, secrecy, and the evolving balance between national security and public trust. Kennedy's assassination had been shrouded in mystery from the very beginning, leading to various conspiracy theories. Was Lee Harvey Oswald the lone gunman, or was there a larger conspiracy at play? Did the U.S. government hide certain facts to avoid political fallout? For decades, the public was left in the dark, with only snippets of information trickling out over time. This secrecy fueled public distrust in government institutions, leading to a growing belief that the powers that be had more to hide than they were willing to admit. Despite the passage of years, the question of transparency remained central to the debate surrounding the release of these documents. Would the truth be revealed? And if so, what did this truth have the potential to unlock? Were these documents a window into a time of political intrigue, Cold War tensions, and covert operations, or was the release merely symbolic, providing answers to questions that had long been buried? The decision to release the JFK assassination documents in 2017 was seen by many as a historic step toward greater government transparency. For years, various U.S. administrations had delayed or partially released documents citing national security concerns. Now, under Trump's administration, the government was poised to open its vaults, at least partially. Yet, as with many political promises, reality proved more complicated than expected. Trump signed the order to release the documents, but the order came with caveats. Some files would remain withheld for reasons of national security, a decision that fueled skepticism about the true nature of transparency in American government. The history of secrecy. The release of the JFK documents was the culmination of a long struggle between the American public and the government over the right to know. The very fact that these documents were classified for so long is telling of the deep culture of secrecy that has often permeated the government. For decades, the narrative surrounding JFK's death was tightly controlled. The Warren Commission, tasked with investigating the assassination, concluded that Oswald acted alone, but over time, the report came under increasing scrutiny, leading many to question the commission's findings. The secrecy that surrounded the assassination fueled an ever-expanding field of conspiracy theories. These theories range from allegations of involvement by the mafia to suggestions that the CIA or even the Soviet Union played a role. The lack of transparency only deepened public distrust in government institutions and cast a shadow over the legitimacy of the Warren Commission's report. But it wasn't just JFK's assassination that sparked calls for transparency. Throughout the 20th century, significant events such as the Watergate scandal, the Iran-Contra affair, and the Vietnam War sparked public outcry over government secrecy. In many cases, it was revealed that government officials had withheld or manipulated information to suit their own political agendas. These episodes of governmental dishonesty or obfuscation left the American public with the sense that the truth, particularly about national security, was often more elusive than it should have been. In response to these events, public demands for transparency grew. The establishment of the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, in 1966 marked a watershed moment in American history. FOIA gave citizens the right to request documents held by the federal government, a tool for ensuring that the government could no longer operate entirely behind closed doors. Over time, however, the government became adept at using national security exemptions to withhold vast amounts of information, especially information that might be embarrassing or politically damaging. The JFK assassination files, then, became a symbol of the larger struggle for transparency and accountability within the U.S. government. Would the release of these records bring clarity, or would it merely add to the uncertainty? Would it contribute to the public's growing belief that the government had often concealed vital information to protect its own interests? A president's decision. In the context of the 2016 presidential election, Trump's decision to release the JFK files became an important political moment. During the campaign, Trump had positioned himself as an outsider, someone who would shake up the establishment and fight against the entrenched interests in Washington, D.C. His decision to release the documents could be seen as an extension of this populist image. By approving the release, Trump appeared to be fulfilling a long-standing promise to drain the swamp and increase transparency in government. However, the decision also raised questions about the role of executive power in matters of national security. The release of the JFK assassination documents was not an automatic process. Trump had the power to decide whether certain files would be released or withheld. This brought attention to the extent of executive control over sensitive information. What criteria did Trump use to decide which documents should remain sealed? And why did he decide to release some, but not others? Was this an example of transparency in action, or was it a politically motivated move designed to appeal to certain factions of the electorate? Moreover, Trump's administration was marked by an overall tension between public transparency and national security concerns. His release of the JFK documents came in the context of larger debates over his administration's handling of classified information, including questions about intelligence leaks and the use of executive power to control information. The juxtaposition of these two dynamics, the desire for openness and the imperative of national security, underscored the ongoing challenge of balancing transparency with the need to protect sensitive information. In the years leading up to the release of the documents, anticipation had built. Scholars, journalists, and conspiracy theorists alike hoped that the release would offer new revelations about the Kennedy assassination. It was as if the documents held the key to a mystery that had remained unsolved for more than half a century. But the reality of the release was less dramatic than many had expected. Many of the documents released were indeed revealing, shedding light on the behind-the-scenes activities of the U.S. government in the years following JFK's death. But they did not provide definitive answers to the questions that had fueled decades of speculation. What the release did demonstrate, however, was something just as important: the continued struggle between government secrecy and the public's right to know. The release was not just about JFK's assassination. It was about the broader issue of how much information the public is entitled to and how much the government is willing to give up. When President Trump authorized the release of the JFK assassination documents in 2017, the world's attention turned to the vaults of the U.S. government. The official narrative had long been that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman responsible for the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, but over the decades, public skepticism about this conclusion had grown. The documents, which had been kept hidden for more than 50 years, were now available for inspection, and people from all walks of life, including journalists, academics, and amateur conspiracy theorists, eagerly dove into the vast archives. Despite the government's assurances that the release would answer lingering questions, the public reaction was mixed. For some, it was a long-awaited breakthrough. Finally, after years of waiting, the American public could see the full picture, unencumbered by government filtering. There was a sense of vindication, a feeling that the truth, however elusive, was finally within reach. But for many others, the documents released did not provide the revelatory answers they had hoped for. The files did not unearth a hidden conspiracy or expose a grand cover-up. Instead, many of the documents were mundane, containing reports, memos, and interviews that had already been known to the public in some form. Some records revealed information about the CIA surveillance of Oswald in the years before the assassination, while others hinted at covert operations and Cold War-era tensions with Cuba and the Soviet Union. The incomplete nature of the documents, combined with the absence of the smoking gun that some had expected, led to frustration among conspiracy theorists who believed that the truth was still being concealed. These individuals pointed to the large number of documents that were still withheld, some due to ongoing national security concerns, and others due to concerns over the privacy of individuals involved in the events. Critics of the release pointed out that while the documents might have exposed more of the government's dealings, they still left too much unaccounted for. The documents were not a total revelation. They were just part of the puzzle. But perhaps the most significant aspect of the release was the ongoing conversation about secrecy and transparency within government. While the release did not provide the ultimate answers, it did reveal something important about how the government operates in the modern age. It exposed the mechanisms through which secrecy is maintained, as well as the extent to which information about national security, intelligence operations, and covert activities is still closely guarded. For those concerned with government overreach and accountability, the JFK document release was a crucial moment, signaling that even the most explosive revelations can be heavily moderated by national security interests. The implications of national security. One of the central themes that emerged from the release of the JFK assassination documents was the issue of national security and its role in shaping government transparency. The U.S. government's justification for withholding certain documents was largely based on national security concerns, a familiar argument used throughout history to justify secrecy. These reasons included the protection of intelligence sources and methods, the safeguarding of ongoing operations, and the preservation of relationships with foreign governments. This tension between transparency and security is a defining characteristic of modern governance. The government's refusal to fully disclose certain details about the assassination underscored the prevailing view that some information is simply too sensitive to be released to the public, regardless of its historical significance. The argument put forward by those in favor of withholding certain files was that national security interests could still be jeopardized, even decades after the events in question. The need to protect intelligence networks and maintain operational secrecy outweighed the perceived need for full transparency. But while the national security argument is a valid one, it also raises questions about the broader implications of government secrecy. How much information should the government be allowed to withhold from the public? And how long should it be allowed to maintain secrecy, even after decades have passed? The release of JFK's assassination records brought these issues to the forefront. The debate about transparency and national security is far from new, but it gained new urgency in the wake of the document release. Some critics of the U.S. government's secrecy argued that such withholding of information is not just about protecting the country. It is also about maintaining control over the narrative. If the full truth of the JFK assassination were to be known, would it change how the public views the government? Would it alter perceptions of institutions like the CIA, the FBI, or even the presidency itself? These questions reflect the broader concern that government institutions have too much power over what the public can and cannot know. The release of the JFK documents may have been an important moment in the fight for transparency, but it also highlighted the ongoing struggle between those who advocate for openness and those who argue that national security concerns must always come first. The role of the media in shaping public perception. As the documents began to be released, the media played a pivotal role in interpreting and disseminating the information. Major news outlets, including the New York Times, Washington Post, and CNN, all devoted significant resources to analyzing the contents of the documents. Journalists combed through the files to find revelations that could shed new light on the events surrounding Kennedy's assassination. Many of the documents published were not new, but they provided further context for the long-standing questions surrounding the assassination. The media's role in the release process was crucial in framing public perception. For example, certain documents raised concerns about the CIA's involvement in covert operations and its ties to anti-Castro Cuban exiles, which in turn fueled renewed interest in conspiracy theories. The media's focus on these elements contributed to the public's sense that the government had long withheld important information about the assassination. While some journalists pushed for full transparency, others questioned whether it was wise to release everything, especially given the potential risks to national security. For many, the documents were a fascinating glimpse into the Cold War-era operations of U.S. intelligence agencies. However, the extensive media coverage also emphasized the larger question: how much does the government control the historical narrative? By framing the release as part of a larger debate on transparency, the media ensured that the story would not simply fade away. Instead, The documents became part of an ongoing discourse about secrecy, trust, and the limits of government authority. A more transparent future? The release of the JFK assassination documents did not offer definitive answers, but it did raise important questions about the future of government transparency. As new administrations take office, there will likely be increasing pressure to declassify more records from the past. The discussion sparked by the release of JFK's files is likely to shape future debates about the balance between national security and the public's right to know. The release also demonstrated the power of technology and the internet in shaping the debate. The vast amount of information that became available to the public in 2017 would have been difficult to disseminate before the digital age. Today, more people can access and analyze government records than ever before. This democratization of information challenges the traditional boundaries of secrecy, creating a new environment where public accountability is more achievable than in the past. The growing demand for transparency, spurred in part by the JFK document release, could be the beginning of a larger shift in how governments around the world handle classified information. As more documents are released in the years to come, it is possible that the public will gain more insight into the shadowy world of intelligence and covert operations. The lessons learned from the release of the JFK files could shape future debates on government transparency, ensuring that the American public will have a larger say in what is kept hidden and what is revealed in the years to come. While the release of the JFK assassination documents is often seen as a unique event in U.S. history, it also provides important insights into the larger patterns of government secrecy that shape our political landscape. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, the U.S. government has consistently demonstrated a reluctance to fully disclose its actions, even when those actions are in the public's historical interest. The JFK documents provide a snapshot of this broader phenomenon, showing the ways in which secrecy has been used to protect political power, shield intelligence operations, and safeguard diplomatic relations. But what is the cost of this secrecy? The decision to withhold documents related to the assassination of a sitting U.S. president reflects a deeper cultural trend within the American political system, a profound tension between the government's desire to protect national interests and the public's demand for accountability and transparency. This dynamic raises important questions about democracy itself. If citizens do not have full access to information about their government's actions, can they truly participate in a meaningful way in the democratic process? The key issue at play is the way that information is filtered and controlled. In a democracy, one of the core tenets is that the government should be held accountable by the people. However, when large swathes of information are kept secret, it becomes more difficult for the public to assess whether the government is acting in their best interests. It is one thing to trust elected officials, but it is another to do so when the government is keeping vital information from view. Throughout history, there have been numerous examples of secrecy leading to disastrous outcomes. The Vietnam War, for instance, was prolonged in part because of government manipulation of the public's understanding of the conflict. The Pentagon Papers revealed how the U.S. government had misled the public about the true nature of the war, creating a huge gulf between what Americans were told and what was actually happening on the ground. Similarly, the Iran-Contra affair showed how covert actions could be taken by government officials without public knowledge or consent, with the potential for severe political consequences. The release of the JFK assassination documents was an attempt to bring the curtain back on one of the most significant political events in U.S. history, but it also illuminated the broader pattern of government secrecy. These documents were not just about Kennedy's death. They were also about the U.S. government's historical tendency to classify, withhold, and obscure information that might be politically sensitive. The power of public trust. At its core, the debate over government secrecy and transparency is about trust. When the government withholds information, it implies that it does not trust the public with that knowledge. This erodes the relationship between citizens and their government. Over time, this lack of trust can have profound effects on the political culture. Public trust in institutions is a key element of a functioning democracy. When that trust is eroded, whether due to scandal, mismanagement, or secrecy, it can lead to disillusionment, disengagement, and a sense of alienation among the public. The public's reaction to the JFK document release underscores this dynamic. While some embraced the idea that the government was opening the door to greater transparency, others felt that the partial release was just another example of a government unwilling to fully reveal the truth. The fact that many records remained sealed or were only partially disclosed left some feeling as though the government was still hiding something significant. If the public feels that the government is hiding the full truth, it can foster a deeper sense of distrust. This breeds cynicism and, in turn, leads to greater division and polarization in society. Moreover, as public scrutiny increases, the government's ability to manage and control information diminishes. In the age of the internet and social media, citizens have greater access to information than ever before. The release of the JFK documents is a reminder of how public access to information is rapidly changing. In the past, government secrecy was more easily enforced because information was harder to come by. But today, the public can connect with others worldwide, share findings, and challenge official narratives. This shift in power, from government institutions to the general public, is making it more difficult for governments to maintain tight control over sensitive information. It is essential to recognize that the release of the JFK documents represents a pivotal moment in the larger struggle for transparency. The nature of the documents, many of which detailed covert CIA operations, Cold War tensions, and surveillance activities, revealed that even the most high-ranking institutions in the government could not shield themselves from the public's gaze forever. The public's access to information, combined with the rise of alternative media sources and investigative reporting, means that citizens now have a more active role in uncovering the truth. However, this shift raises questions about the long-term effects of a more transparent government. The challenges of government accountability. While transparency is undoubtedly a key ingredient in a functioning democracy, it is not without its challenges. As the release of the JFK assassination documents demonstrated, the process of declassifying sensitive information is often more complex than it appears. Government officials must consider a range of factors, including national security, diplomatic relations, and the protection of individuals involved in sensitive operations. While the public may demand full disclosure, the government often argues that some level of secrecy is necessary for the safety and stability of the nation. The issue of accountability also comes into play. While the documents released in 2017 were a step toward greater transparency, they did not resolve many of the core issues that people hoped would be clarified. There were still many unanswered questions about the JFK assassination, including the role of various agencies, foreign governments, and potential conspiracies. But even if the government were to release everything, would that guarantee accountability? Would the truth of Kennedy's death change anything in the way the U.S. government operates today? Government secrecy is not just about withholding facts. It is also about controlling narratives and shaping political outcomes. This is why the release of documents, like those relating to JFK's assassination, often leads to further questions about the broader structure of government power. It is not simply about transparency. It is about whether we can trust our institutions to act in the public's interest. This is why, even in cases where records are released, questions about accountability linger. For example, the JFK documents confirmed some of the worst fears about government overreach, particularly in relation to the CIA's activities. But without concrete accountability for the actions taken during that period, the documents remained an incomplete reflection of the government's accountability to the public. The reality is that transparency without accountability may not achieve the public's desired outcome. The government may reveal facts, but without real consequences for past actions, transparency can sometimes feel like an empty gesture. A turning point in the struggle for transparency. The decision to release the JFK assassination documents was symbolic in many ways. It represented a moment where the government was forced to reckon with the long-standing demands for transparency and accountability. It was not a moment of complete victory for those who have advocated for a more open and accountable government, but it did represent a victory for those who believe that information should be shared freely when it is in the public interest. The release of these documents is part of a larger shift toward greater transparency, one that will likely continue to evolve as new technologies and new political realities emerge. As citizens demand greater access to information, governments may find it increasingly difficult to maintain secrecy. especially as the nature of information sharing continues to change. However, the struggle between transparency and national security will likely continue to be a central theme in the coming decades. The full implications of these shifts remain to be seen. In the end, the release of the JFK assassination documents didn't provide all the answers, but it offered a window into the complex relationship between government secrecy, transparency, and accountability. And as the debate over these issues continues, one thing is clear: the struggle for an open government that serves the public remains one of the most important challenges of our time. The release of the JFK assassination documents in 2017 was a rare and noteworthy event in American history, a glimpse into the broader struggle for transparency within government institutions. While the documents themselves did not provide the earth-shattering revelation some had hoped for, they nonetheless sparked an essential dialogue about the complex interplay between secrecy, accountability, and the public's right to know. This chapter of U.S. history offers valuable lessons about the nature of power and the ways in which transparency can both reveal and obscure important truths. What the release demonstrated, more than anything, was the tension between transparency and national security. The U.S. government's continual reliance on national security concerns to justify secrecy was laid bare. Even as thousands of documents were made available, many were still kept under wraps. What were the real reasons for keeping some records sealed? Was the information too sensitive for public consumption, or were there political motivations at play? While the government argued that these documents needed to remain classified for national security reasons, many viewed the continued secrecy as an attempt to control the narrative about JFK's assassination rather than a genuine concern for the nation's safety. The paradox here is that, despite the release of thousands of documents, the question of government secrecy and the public's right to know remained largely unresolved. The fact that some of the most important files were withheld, citing national security concerns or other justifications, led many to question whether the government would ever truly allow the full truth to come to light. Were we witnessing an effort to provide transparency, or was this simply a well-calculated move to placate public demand without offering substantive answers? The long-term impact of the JFK document release on public trust. One of the central lessons from the release of the JFK assassination files is the impact it had on public trust in government institutions. Throughout the 20th century, the American government grappled with an increasing demand for transparency in the wake of major scandals like Watergate, the Pentagon Papers, and Iran-Contra. As each of these incidents unfolded, they revealed the ways in which government officials had manipulated or concealed information from the public. These revelations contributed to a growing sense of distrust among the American people, and the JFK files release only added to that feeling. The fact that a president's assassination, a historical event of monumental significance, was kept hidden from the public for so long only deepened the public's belief that the government was not forthcoming with the truth. As millions of citizens pored over the newly released documents, they found themselves questioning the motivations behind years of secrecy. Could it be that there were truths the government was still unwilling to reveal? And if so, what does this say about the state of democracy and the government's obligation to serve the public? The release did not only affect public trust in the U.S. government, it also played into the growing narrative of political distrust. The conspiracy theories that have dogged the Kennedy assassination for decades were only amplified by the government's continued secrecy. As people discovered more information about the CIA's activities and its connections to anti-Castro Cubans and other covert operations, the mystery surrounding Kennedy's death seemed as elusive as ever. This only fueled more distrust in the U.S. government, and in some cases, it confirmed the suspicions of those who believed that the government had intentionally concealed the truth for decades. For many, the document release was less a triumphant moment of transparency than it was another chapter in the story of an untrustworthy government. The delay in the release of the records and the continued redactions raised serious concerns about the nature of governmental transparency and whether it was ever truly intended to be complete. How could citizens fully trust the information given to them when such crucial parts of the story remained hidden? The role of whistleblowers in promoting transparency. Beyond official government releases, another important avenue for ensuring transparency has been the role of whistleblowers. Figures like Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon Papers, and Edward Snowden, who exposed widespread surveillance programs, have played pivotal roles in pushing the government to reveal information that might otherwise have remained secret. These individuals took immense personal risks in order to expose government actions that they believed were detrimental to the public good. In the context of JFK's assassination, however, there were no whistleblowers who stepped forward with smoking gun revelations. It's worth noting that whistleblowers often face harsh consequences for revealing classified information. In the case of Snowden, for example, he was forced to seek asylum in Russia after his disclosures regarding the National Security Agency's mass surveillance programs. Ellsberg, too, faced legal challenges and public vilification after releasing the Pentagon Papers. These examples underscore the immense risks associated with breaking the silence on government secrets. In the case of the JFK assassination documents, no such whistleblowers emerged, and as a result, many of the most critical questions remained unanswered. However, the broader lesson here is that transparency is often only achieved when individuals are willing to take significant personal risks to expose the truth. Without whistleblowers or investigative journalists willing to challenge government narratives, there may be very little that remains publicly known about important historical events. This highlights the importance of civil liberties and the right to speak truth to power. Without these protections, government secrecy could continue unchecked. The future of government secrecy in the age of digital transparency. In the years following the release of the JFK files, the question of government secrecy has become even more relevant in the digital age. The internet and social media platforms have revolutionized the ways in which information is shared and consumed. News can spread in real time, and once secret documents are now uploaded to public forums where anyone can access them. This technological shift has placed enormous pressure on governments to rethink their approaches to secrecy and transparency. The increased availability of information through the internet has made it much harder for governments to maintain the kind of secrecy that was possible during the 20th century. In the past, sensitive government documents were contained within physical archives and classified vaults, accessible only to a small circle of officials and researchers. Today, however, information can be instantly disseminated worldwide, often bypassing traditional channels of control. This shift creates both opportunities and challenges. On the one hand, it allows for a more open government, one where citizens can more easily access and scrutinize the actions of their elected officials. On the other hand, it makes it more difficult for governments to control what information is released. This is particularly true in the context of national security, where the rapid dissemination of sensitive information could potentially undermine military operations or diplomatic efforts. As the digital era continues to evolve, government agencies will face increasing pressure to balance transparency with national security. The digital age has made it easier for citizens to demand more openness, but it has also introduced new risks for governments that are reluctant to relinquish control over sensitive information. The lessons from the release of the JFK assassination files will undoubtedly influence how governments navigate this balancing act in the future. The role of the public in demanding greater transparency. Ultimately, the release of the JFK documents serves as a reminder of the power of public demand in driving government transparency. While the government did not release every document related to Kennedy's assassination, the public's insistence on disclosure led to the unveiling of a significant body of information. The public played a crucial role in holding the government accountable, pressuring officials to act in the interests of transparency. This is a key takeaway for future efforts to secure government transparency. While individual presidents and political leaders may be reluctant to release sensitive information, the public has the power to push for change. In many cases, it is through persistent activism, petitioning, and public discourse that the government is ultimately forced to reveal what it has kept hidden. The release of the JFK documents is not an isolated case, but part of a larger ongoing movement to ensure that government institutions are more accountable and open to public scrutiny. Conclusion: the continuing fight for transparency and accountability. The release of the JFK assassination documents was a significant step forward in the struggle for transparency and accountability in government. However, it is clear that this is just one chapter in a much larger narrative about the need for governments to be held accountable for their actions. The documents themselves offered new insights into the events of 1963, but they also left many questions unanswered, particularly about the true extent of government involvement in the assassination and the broader narrative of secrecy. The fight for transparency, as the release of the JFK records demonstrates, is ongoing. The challenges of balancing national security with the public's right to know are complex and multifaceted. But the need for transparency is more pressing than ever, especially in an age where citizens are more informed and connected than ever before. As future generations continue to demand greater openness, the lessons learned from the release of the JFK assassination files will serve as an important guide in the ongoing effort to hold governments accountable and ensure that the public can trust the institutions that serve them. The release of the JFK assassination documents marked not only a pivotal moment in U.S. history, but also a watershed event in the global struggle for transparency. The political climate of secrecy that surrounded President Kennedy's death, especially the apparent reluctance of government institutions to fully disclose information about such a seminal event, echoed the struggles in other parts of the world. Transparency, after all, is not merely a domestic concern. The lessons learned from the JFK document release have implications far beyond American borders, shaping attitudes toward government accountability, civil liberties, and democratic values worldwide. The documents revealed various covert operations and intelligence activities, often operating behind the scenes of public knowledge. The public's reaction to these revelations was a mix of frustration, disbelief, and a renewed demand for greater transparency. These documents were not just about a single historical event. They served as a critical example of how governments across the globe often withhold vital information from their citizens. What was revealed in the JFK records, then, was not just a snapshot of the assassination itself, but also the larger question of whether the public has a right to know about the inner workings of government power. The case study of JFK's death, wrapped in layers of secrecy and withheld documents, reflected the challenges faced by citizens in democratic societies everywhere who are attempting to peer beyond the veil of secrecy. Just as citizens in the U.S. demanded answers about Kennedy's assassination, the global community increasingly demands accountability from their own governments. Global movements for transparency and accountability. The release of the JFK documents reverberated beyond the U.S. and set an example for other nations grappling with similar questions of transparency. Across the globe, many countries faced similar tensions between state security and citizens' rights to know. Whether it's the archives of the Soviet Union, military actions in the Middle East, or government operations in Asia, the demand for openness is universal. Take, for example, the influence of the WikiLeaks disclosures, which in 2010 exposed U.S. diplomatic cables and military logs. Just as the JFK documents sparked public debate about government secrecy, WikiLeaks ignited a firestorm over the transparency of modern government affairs. Despite the differences in time and place, both events share a common thread: a growing global distrust of institutions that keep secrets, particularly when those secrets involve acts of state-sponsored violence, covert intelligence activities, or abuses of power. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange and whistleblower Chelsea Manning were heavily influenced by the belief that information about governmental activities should be accessible to the public. These global efforts to expose state secrets are not just confined to one country. They are a part of a broader movement for freedom of information. These movements are pushing the limits of what governments can keep hidden, questioning the very idea that citizens should be kept in the dark for their own good. In the U.S., movements for government transparency, fueled by a combination of citizen activism, media scrutiny, and whistleblowing, have led to some key changes in how the government approaches public access to information. The release of the JFK documents, while far from perfect, represents a symbolic victory for advocates of transparency. It demonstrates that persistent public pressure can lead to the partial declassification of sensitive government information. But even with these victories, the global struggle for transparency continues. In many authoritarian regimes around the world, governments continue to operate with almost total impunity, hiding their actions from public view. Countries with repressive governments continue to classify vast amounts of information, often citing national security or the protection of state interests. These regimes do not experience the same public pressures as democracies like the United States. As a result, the fight for transparency remains uneven, and much more work is needed to ensure that governments around the world are held accountable to their citizens. The evolving nature of secrecy, state surveillance, and the digital age. In the modern era, one of the most pressing concerns when it comes to government secrecy is the expansion of state surveillance. The digital age has provided governments with unprecedented tools to collect, store, and analyze data on their citizens. This raises important questions about the balance between security and privacy, and how much information the government is entitled to withhold or use to monitor its own people. The rise of mass surveillance programs, such as those exposed by Edward Snowden, reveals the extent to which governments are willing to go to maintain control and secrecy. These programs, like the National Security Agency's NSA, bulk data collection, reflect a growing trend of government overreach and the erosion of individual privacy. What makes these revelations particularly troubling is that they came to light only after whistleblowers took extraordinary risks to expose them. Despite the release of such sensitive information, the full extent of the programs remains unclear, and the debate over privacy versus national security continues to this day. The JFK assassination documents, in contrast, belong to a different era. They concern events that occurred during the Cold War, before the digital revolution transformed the tools available to governments. However, the continued secrecy surrounding the documents suggests a deeper truth. The desire for control, power, and secrecy transcends the technological tools available to governments. Whether through paper records or digital surveillance, the impulse to conceal sensitive information remains a defining feature of governmental power. As technology advances, the scope of state secrecy and surveillance continues to grow, making it all the more important for citizens to advocate for transparency and oversight. Governments now have access to vast stores of personal data, and the potential for abuse is immense. While the release of the JFK documents was a small victory in the fight for transparency, it's clear that much more needs to be done to ensure that the government's ability to withhold information does not infringe on the rights of individuals. The role of journalism in ensuring accountability. Journalism has long played a crucial role in holding governments accountable, and the release of the JFK assassination documents once again underscores the critical importance of investigative reporting. Journalists are often the first line of defense in uncovering government secrets, particularly when whistleblowers are unable or unwilling to come forward. The release of sensitive documents is often made possible by the tireless work of investigative reporters who painstakingly sift through vast amounts of information to uncover hidden truths. In the case of the JFK documents, the role of journalists was pivotal in interpreting and contextualizing the information that was made available to the public. The investigative reporting that followed the release of the documents helped ensure that the public could understand the significance of the records and the questions that remained unanswered. By bringing attention to these issues, the media helped to keep the debate about government transparency alive and ensured that the release of the documents was not simply a one-off event, but part of a larger ongoing conversation about the role of secrecy in government. The media's role in shaping the narrative surrounding the JFK assassination also highlighted the power of public discourse. In a democracy, the press acts as a conduit between the government and the people, ensuring that citizens are informed about the actions of those who represent them. When the press is silenced or weakened, as it has been in some countries, the public's ability to hold their leaders accountable is severely compromised. The press is a cornerstone of transparency, and its ability to function freely is crucial to ensuring that the government remains answerable to the people. Looking forward, the need for continued advocacy. Despite the release of the JFK assassination documents, the journey toward full transparency remains ongoing. In the United States, many documents are still withheld, and there is an increasing recognition that the fight for transparency must be sustained across many fronts. Whether it's related to the CIA's operations, military interventions, or other covert actions, the public has a right to know what its government is doing on its behalf. The challenge ahead is not just to continue advocating for the release of classified documents, but also to create an environment in which the public has the tools and resources to interpret and act on the information they receive. The release of documents like those related to JFK's assassination is a small piece of the larger puzzle. To create real change, there must be a cultural shift that values openness and accountability as integral parts of a democratic society. The future of transparency hinges on the willingness of individuals and civil society organizations to continue pushing for greater openness. With the advent of digital technologies, the global landscape is shifting toward a new age of transparency, one in which information flows more freely but also carries new risks. It is up to citizens, journalists, and advocates to ensure that the information we receive is not just public but meaningful, and that the government remains answerable to the people it serves. As the 21st century progresses, the struggle for transparency in government continues to shape not only political landscapes, but also the very fabric of democratic societies. The release of the JFK assassination documents was a significant moment in that ongoing fight, but it was just one chapter in a much larger narrative about the intersection of secrecy, power, and accountability. The implications of these revelations extend far beyond the particular events of 1963 and the life of President Kennedy. They reflect the enduring tension between the state's desire to maintain control and the public's right to know. The lessons learned from the JFK document release resonate through the corridors of contemporary political power, both in the U.S. and abroad. As the nature of governance evolves and new challenges arise, the issue of secrecy, what can be concealed and for how long, remains a central question. In many ways, the release of these documents became a prism through which broader political and societal issues could be examined. Among the key concerns are the role of secrecy in fostering democratic legitimacy, the erosion of civil liberties, and the potential for political manipulation. The illusion of control, government secrecy as a tool of power. Government secrecy, often cloaked under the guise of national security, serves as a potent tool for consolidating and maintaining political power. The JFK assassination documents, along with many other classified materials from the mid-20th century, highlight the ways in which governments, particularly in times of crisis or political instability, have utilized secrecy as a means of controlling the narrative and managing public opinion. While some secrecy is undoubtedly necessary to safeguard national security interests, there is a delicate line between legitimate concerns and the abuse of power. In the case of the JFK assassination, the delay in releasing documents for decades raises the question: was this secrecy genuinely about protecting U.S. interests, or was it an effort to protect powerful individuals and institutions from scrutiny? The fact that some critical files remain sealed only fuels suspicions about the motivations behind government secrecy. In the broader context, this trend has significant political ramifications. Governments that routinely classify information, suppress inconvenient truths, and selectively release documents risk undermining the very principles of transparency and democratic accountability. When government officials have the power to control what information is shared with the public, they also control the public's understanding of events, policies, and their own actions. This consolidation of control is deeply undemocratic, as it diminishes citizens' ability to make informed decisions about their leaders and policies. Moreover, the opacity of governmental decision-making can contribute to a culture of distrust. As citizens see key documents withheld or redacted, they begin to question whether their leaders are acting in good faith. The JFK assassination documents, despite their eventual release, serve as a reminder of the government's long-standing tendency to operate in secrecy. The fact that so many of these documents remained sealed for so long, combined with the selective nature of the release, only exacerbated suspicions about the integrity of the information provided. The erosion of civil liberties in the name of national security. The release of sensitive documents like those related to the JFK assassination is closely linked to broader debates about the erosion of civil liberties in the name of national security. The history of U.S. government secrecy has been marked by a recurring tension between protecting individual freedoms and ensuring national security. However, as revealed by the actions of the CIA, FBI, and other intelligence agencies, this tension has often tipped in favor of government power, leading to widespread violations of civil rights. One of the most notorious examples of this is the FBI's COINTELPRO program, which targeted civil rights leaders, political activists, and other dissidents under the guise of national security concerns. The government's justification for these invasive measures was often framed as a defense against subversive elements that posed a threat to the country's stability. But in practice, these programs were frequently used to undermine legitimate political movements and silence dissent. The secrecy surrounding CONTLPRO, along with the destruction of key records related to these operations, illustrates the dangers of unchecked governmental power. Similarly, the U.S. government's post-9/11 surveillance programs, revealed by whistleblower Edward Snowden, demonstrate how national security justifications can be used to justify widespread infringements on privacy and civil liberties. The surveillance state, fueled by digital technologies, collects vast amounts of data on citizens' everyday lives, often without their knowledge or consent. These programs, like the JFK documents, raise important questions about the balance between security and individual freedoms. The lesson here is clear. When governments prioritize secrecy over transparency and control over accountability, civil liberties often suffer. In a democratic society, the public's right to know should not be sacrificed in the name of national security. The release of historical documents, such as those related to JFK's assassination, serves as an important reminder of the need to protect civil liberties even in times of national crisis. The political manipulation of history and memory. The JFK assassination and the subsequent efforts to uncover the truth about it also point to a broader phenomenon of political manipulation through the control of historical narratives. Governments that selectively release information or withhold key documents have the power to shape the way history is remembered and understood. This process of historical manipulation can have profound implications for political legitimacy and public trust. The JFK assassination is often treated as a political symbol, an event that defined a generation of Americans. But as long as critical documents remain hidden, the official narrative of that event remains incomplete. This deliberate obscuring of historical facts creates fertile ground for conspiracy theories and alternative narratives to flourish. In the absence of complete transparency, the public is left to speculate and fill in the gaps with their own interpretations. These competing versions of history can be deeply divisive, further eroding trust in the government and its institutions. In a democracy, the ability to critically examine historical events and hold leaders accountable for their actions is essential. The selective release of documents, or the deliberate manipulation of historical records, undermines this process and weakens democratic institutions. The question that lingers after the release of the JFK documents is, how much more is being hidden, and for what purpose? Secrecy and the political economy, the costs of concealing information. Another important aspect of the government's withholding of documents is its impact on the political economy. The resources required to maintain secrecy, whether in the form of intelligence gathering, document classification, or surveillance programs, are vast. The costs of running a secretive government are often borne by taxpayers, whose money is spent on efforts to control information, restrict access, and suppress dissent. In addition, the very nature of secrecy creates a culture of inefficiency and waste within government agencies. When information is tightly controlled and access is limited, decision-making becomes slower and less effective. Bureaucratic inertia thrives in environments where transparency is minimal, as agencies are more concerned with maintaining secrecy than with delivering effective public services. This inefficiency can have serious consequences for everything from national security to public health and education. Moreover, the secrecy surrounding government actions often leads to the concentration of power in the hands of a few. In a system where information is restricted and decisions are made behind closed doors, accountability is undermined and political power becomes increasingly centralized. This centralization of power is dangerous, as it removes checks and balances and leaves citizens with little recourse to challenge the actions of their leaders. The importance of an informed citizenry. One of the central tenets of democracy is the idea that citizens must be informed in order to make educated decisions about their leaders and policies. Transparency, therefore, is not merely a technical or legal issue, it is a moral one. Governments are accountable to the people, and part of that accountability is ensuring that citizens have access to the information they need to hold their leaders responsible. The release of the JFK assassination documents, while far from perfect, was an important step in the right direction. It allowed the public to peer behind the curtain of secrecy and see, at least in part, what had been hidden for so long. But it also served as a reminder that much remains to be revealed and that the fight for transparency must continue. The history of government secrecy is a story of power, control, and the erosion of trust. To reverse this trend, it is essential that citizens continue to demand openness, accountability, and the release of critical information. Conclusion: the continuing struggle for open government. The release of the JFK assassination documents was a momentous occasion, but it is only one part of the broader struggle for governmental transparency and accountability. It revealed the deep tensions that exist between the need for national security and the right of the public to know the truth. While the release of these documents represented a victory for advocates of transparency, it also underscored the ongoing challenges that governments and citizens face in balancing secrecy and openness. As we move forward into the 21st century, the lessons of the JFK document release remain as relevant as ever. In an era of digital technology and global interconnectivity, the struggle for transparency is more important than ever. Governments must be held accountable for their actions, and the public must have access to the information necessary to make informed decisions. The fight for transparency, for the release of classified documents, and for a more open government is far from over. But the release of the JFK documents shows that it is possible to challenge the culture of secrecy and bring hidden truths to light. As citizens continue to demand greater openness, transparency, and accountability, the lessons of the past will guide the way toward a more democratic and informed future. The ongoing debate surrounding government secrecy and transparency is not just about the release of historical documents or classified information. It is also deeply rooted in the tensions between state power, democracy, and the role of activism in pushing for change. As the release of the JFK assassination documents demonstrates, the public's ability to hold their government accountable is contingent upon an informed citizenry. However, the ability to achieve transparency is often fraught with resistance from powerful institutions that have a vested interest in maintaining control over the flow of information. As history has shown, political activism plays a pivotal role in challenging these entrenched interests and demanding greater openness. The fight for transparency is not a static process. It is ongoing and requires constant vigilance from both individuals and organized movements. This section will explore the relationship between secrecy, democracy, and political activism, emphasizing how ordinary citizens and social movements can, and have, altered the course of government secrecy, sometimes at great personal risk. The role of political activism in the pursuit of transparency. Political activism is an essential driver of social and political change. Throughout history, movements have risen up against the entrenched power structures that perpetuate secrecy, corruption, and injustice. Whether it's the civil rights movement, the anti-war protests during the Vietnam era, or contemporary movements for government accountability, activism has been crucial in challenging government's use of secrecy to cover up inconvenient truths. In the case of the JFK assassination, political activism emerged as a response to the public's frustration with the official narrative and the lack of transparency surrounding the investigation. Advocacy groups, investigative journalists, and concerned citizens banded together to demand the release of documents that would shed light on the events leading up to and following President Kennedy's death. Their efforts were met with resistance, but their activism eventually contributed to a long and hard-fought battle for greater transparency in government records. The push for the release of these documents was not an isolated event. It was part of a broader movement to challenge government secrecy and demand accountability for past actions. Activism surrounding the JFK assassination also played a significant role in shaping public perceptions of the event. The more people became aware of the secrecy surrounding Kennedy's death, the more they began to question the official version of events. As more documents were made public, new questions arose, and a critical discourse emerged around the role of powerful institutions in shaping history. Political activism, therefore, was not just about demanding the release of information, but about challenging the narratives that had been shaped by those in power. One notable example of this type of activism was the work of researchers and journalists like Jim Garrison, the New Orleans district attorney who famously pursued a controversial investigation into the assassination in the 1960s. Garrison's work, although widely criticized at the time, highlighted the importance of independent inquiry and the need for political figures to challenge official government accounts. In many ways, Garrison's efforts were an early manifestation of the kind of activism that would become critical in later decades, as public trust in government continued to erode. Secrecy as a tool of political power and the erosion of democratic institutions. One of the critical concerns surrounding government secrecy is its corrosive impact on democratic institutions. When governments operate in secrecy, they undermine the core principles of democracy: transparency, accountability, and the free exchange of ideas. Secrecy in government fosters an environment where power becomes increasingly concentrated in the hands of a select few, and the public's ability to scrutinize and challenge government actions is limited. The release of the JFK assassination documents serves as a potent reminder of how secrecy can perpetuate distrust in democratic institutions. The fact that critical information related to such a pivotal event was hidden for so long speaks to the extent to which governmental power can shield itself from public oversight. When the public is kept in the dark, it becomes more difficult to hold political leaders accountable for their actions, whether it is in relation to the assassination itself or the broader policies and decisions of the time. This concentration of power is not limited to the events surrounding JFK's death. It extends to the way governments manage other areas of public life. In the decades following the assassination, government secrecy extended to military operations, intelligence gathering, and even ordinary citizens' private lives. The post-9/11 era, marked by widespread surveillance programs, further illustrates the danger of unchecked secrecy. As revealed by whistleblowers like Edward Snowden, government agencies were engaging in mass surveillance on citizens, often without their knowledge or consent. These actions, justified under the guise of national security, led to significant violations of privacy and civil liberties. The erosion of democratic institutions is further compounded by the lack of transparency surrounding these covert actions. When citizens are unaware of the scope and scale of government operations, they are unable to properly engage in the democratic process. Without access to crucial information, the public is left in the dark about key decisions that affect their lives. The result is a weakening of the democratic contract, where the people no longer have the tools to participate fully in the governance of their own country. Whistleblowing and civil disobedience, tools of political resistance. Whistleblowing and civil disobedience have emerged as key tools in the fight for transparency, providing mechanisms for individuals within government institutions to expose secrets that they believe should be made public. The actions of whistleblowers like Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon Papers in 1971, and Edward Snowden, who exposed the extent of the NSA's surveillance programs, have been instrumental in uncovering governmental secrecy and challenging the official narratives pushed by powerful institutions. Ellsberg's release of the Pentagon Papers, which exposed the U.S. government's misleading statements about the Vietnam War, was a pivotal moment in the fight for transparency. The papers revealed that the government had systematically misrepresented the progress of the war to the American public, thereby undermining trust in government institutions. Ellsberg's act of civil disobedience forced the country to confront the truth about its military actions, and his actions were widely praised as a moral stand against government deception. Similarly, Edward Snowden's revelations about the NSA's mass surveillance programs were a direct challenge to the increasing scope of government power and the erosion of civil liberties. Snowden's decision to leak classified information was controversial, but it sparked a global debate about the limits of state power and the right to privacy. While some hailed Snowden as a hero for exposing government overreach, others argued that his actions compromised national security. Nonetheless, Snowden's whistleblowing effort highlighted the growing tension between state secrecy and the public's right to know. In both cases, these whistleblowers took extraordinary risks to reveal information that was hidden from the public. Their actions were motivated by a belief that transparency is essential for the functioning of a healthy democracy. The fact that these individuals faced legal and personal repercussions underscores the challenges that activists face when confronting government secrecy. Whistleblowing, though an essential act of resistance, often comes at great personal cost. The role of social movements in reframing political discourse. In addition to the work of individual whistleblowers, social movements play a crucial role in reframing political discourse and raising public awareness about issues of government secrecy. Movements like the Transparency International Organization, which advocates for the reduction of corruption and the promotion of open governance, have pushed for greater openness in both governmental and corporate sectors. These organizations have successfully mobilized people around the world to demand more transparency and accountability from those in power. The digital age has made it easier for activists to connect across borders, share information, and organize campaigns for transparency. Movements such as Occupy Wall Street and the Arab Spring are prime examples of how activists can use social media and digital platforms to push for political change in an age of government surveillance and secrecy. These movements have demonstrated the power of collective action in challenging powerful institutions and demanding greater transparency and accountability. As social movements evolve, the demand for transparency remains at the heart of their agendas. Whether it is in the context of corporate corruption, environmental justice, or government surveillance, activists continue to demand access to the information that allows citizens to hold powerful entities accountable. The ongoing efforts of social movements represent a powerful force pushing against the entrenched culture of secrecy in government, echoing the efforts of previous generations to ensure that information is not kept hidden from the public. Conclusion: transparency, activism, and the future of government secrecy. The intersection of secrecy, democracy, and political activism is complex and multifaceted. The release of the JFK assassination documents serves as a reminder of the ongoing struggle for transparency and accountability in government. It demonstrates that, despite the efforts of governments to conceal information, activism and public pressure can bring hidden truths to light. As we look toward the future, the fight for transparency will continue to evolve. The rise of digital technology and social media has made it easier than ever for individuals and organizations to share information and mobilize for political change. However, it has also created new challenges in terms of government surveillance and the potential for censorship. The balance between state power and individual freedoms remains a critical issue, one that will shape the political discourse of the coming decades. For democracy to thrive, the public must have access to the information needed to hold their leaders accountable. The struggle for transparency is ongoing, but the lessons of the JFK document release and the activism that made it possible offer hope for the future. By continuing to demand greater openness and holding government institutions accountable, citizens can ensure that the principles of transparency and accountability remain at the core of democratic society. As the struggle for transparency and accountability continues to unfold in the United States, the implications of government secrecy are not confined to one nation. The release of the JFK assassination documents resonates beyond American borders, and the lessons learned from these events have global significance. Governments around the world grapple with similar issues of secrecy, censorship, and the right of citizens to know the truth about their leaders' actions. Government secrecy is not a uniquely American problem. It is a pervasive issue in democracies, authoritarian regimes, and everything in between. The balance between national security, diplomatic relations, and the right to access information is a challenge that many nations face. Understanding the global dimensions of government secrecy, as well as the international efforts to demand greater transparency, is essential for contextualizing the broader fight for open governance. Global perspectives on government secrecy, patterns, and parallels. Around the world, secrecy is often justified as necessary for maintaining national security, protecting state interests, or preserving political stability. Yet, these justifications are frequently used to hide corruption, human rights violations, and other forms of state misconduct. While countries differ in their approaches to governance, a common thread exists: the tension between the need for secrecy in matters of state and the public's right to be informed. For example, in Russia, the legacy of secrecy from the Soviet era continues to shape the modern political landscape. Despite the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Russian government under Vladimir Putin has maintained a tight grip on information. While there has been some degree of reform in terms of media freedom since the 1990s, many journalists and political opponents of the regime continue to face harassment, imprisonment, and even assassination. The Kremlin's control over the flow of information has led to a chilling effect on free expression, and transparency remains elusive. Similarly, in China, state secrecy is integral to the functioning of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. The CCP operates under a culture of concealment, where critical information about political decisions, economic policies, and human rights violations is often hidden from the public. The Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989, for instance, remains largely censored in China, with the government actively suppressing any mention of the event in public discourse. This commitment to secrecy is framed as necessary to maintain social stability, but it also contributes to the consolidation of power in the hands of a few, leaving little room for public scrutiny. In contrast, many European nations have taken steps to address government secrecy by implementing stronger transparency laws and fostering a culture of openness. Countries like Sweden, Finland, and Denmark are often regarded as models of transparency, where citizens have relatively easy access to government documents and public officials are held accountable for their actions. However, even in these countries, there are still challenges to transparency. For instance, in the United Kingdom, the Official Secrets Act has been used to prosecute whistleblowers and protect sensitive information, raising questions about the limits of freedom of information. Despite these differences, a global movement toward greater government transparency is gradually taking shape. International organizations such as Transparency International and the Open Government Partnership advocate for the reduction of corruption and the expansion of citizen access to information. These efforts highlight the importance of global cooperation in combating secrecy and promoting accountability. International legal frameworks for transparency. The global push for transparency is also supported by international legal frameworks that advocate for open governance and the right to access public information. One of the most significant international documents in this regard is the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, which encourages nations to adopt measures to ensure transparency, accountability, and public participation in governance. This treaty, which has been ratified by over 180 countries, calls for the establishment of anti-corruption agencies, the creation of public record systems, and the promotion of transparency in government contracts and public spending. The right to access information is also enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948. Article 19 of the Declaration states that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. This provision underscores the universal right to access information, which is essential for an informed citizenry and effective governance. In recent years, numerous countries have enacted Freedom of Information (FOI) laws, which legally oblige governments to disclose certain documents to the public. These laws are intended to promote transparency and allow citizens to hold their leaders accountable. However, these laws are not always enforced, and governments frequently rely on loopholes or national security concerns to withhold important information. In some cases, FOI requests are delayed for years or denied altogether, highlighting the ongoing challenges of transparency in many parts of the world. The role of international journalism in exposing secrecy. While government transparency is essential for democratic governance, it is often independent journalists and investigative reporters who play the most significant role in uncovering secrets that powerful institutions would prefer to keep hidden. Investigative journalism, through its uncovering of corruption, abuse of power, and governmental misconduct, often becomes the engine of transparency. One of the most notable examples of international investigative journalism is the work done by organizations like WikiLeaks. Founded by Julian Assange in 2006, WikiLeaks became famous for publishing classified government documents from countries around the world. Some of the most significant leaks include the publication of U.S. diplomatic cables in 2010, which exposed the inner workings of American foreign policy, and the release of classified military documents related to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. These leaks were controversial, with many defending them as a public service while others criticized them as reckless breaches of national security. Similarly, major news outlets like the New York Times, The Guardian, and Der Spiegel have exposed government secrets through investigative reporting. One of the most famous examples is the Pentagon Papers, a leaked report on the U.S. government's handling of the Vietnam War. This leak, published in 1971, revealed that the U.S. had been misleading the public about the progress of the war, fueling widespread public dissent. The Pentagon Papers ultimately led to the resignation of several high-ranking officials and played a significant role in ending U.S. involvement in Vietnam. More recently, the Panama Papers, a leak of documents from the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca, revealed the global network of offshore tax havens used by politicians, business leaders, and celebrities to evade taxes and launder money. The leak led to global protests and calls for greater regulation of the offshore financial industry. The Panama Papers served as a reminder of the power of investigative journalism in holding the powerful accountable. The dark side of secrecy, the role of intelligence agencies and state surveillance. While the release of documents related to the JFK assassination represents a victory for transparency advocates, it is crucial to remember that the battle for openness is ongoing. Government secrecy is often enshrined in the activities of intelligence agencies and their surveillance programs. The revelations made by whistleblowers such as Edward Snowden shed light on the extensive surveillance conducted by agencies like the NSA and GCHQ, which routinely collect vast amounts of data on individuals, both domestically and internationally. In many countries, intelligence agencies operate with little oversight, and the information they gather is often shrouded in secrecy. The increasing reliance on digital technologies for surveillance purposes has only expanded the reach of these agencies, raising concerns about privacy and civil liberties. Intelligence agencies frequently justify their activities by claiming they are necessary to combat terrorism and protect national security. However, the lack of transparency regarding the scope and methods of these programs makes it difficult for citizens to assess whether they are truly in the public interest. The Snowden revelations demonstrated that even democratic governments can engage in large-scale surveillance that infringes on the rights of their citizens. The US and UK governments, along with others, faced widespread backlash for their roles in these programs. The extent of government surveillance and the secrecy surrounding these activities sparked debates about the limits of state power, leading to calls for reforms to protect individual freedoms. The global nature of intelligence operations further complicates the issue of transparency. Surveillance programs often span multiple countries, with intelligence agencies sharing information across borders. This cross-border cooperation allows governments to circumvent national laws and avoid scrutiny, creating a system of secrecy that is difficult to challenge. Conclusion: the global struggle for transparency and accountability. The release of the JFK assassination documents is part of a broader global struggle for transparency and accountability in government. Across the world, citizens and activists continue to demand greater openness from their leaders and institutions. While progress has been made in some countries, secrecy remains a significant obstacle to true democracy and good governance. The global fight for transparency requires collective action. Governments, civil society organizations, journalists, and ordinary citizens must work together to ensure that information is not hoarded by those in power. The lessons learned from the release of the JFK documents, along with the work of investigative journalists, whistleblowers, and social movements, remind us that secrecy cannot be allowed to erode democracy. In an increasingly interconnected world, the struggle for transparency is not just a national issue, but a global one, and the fight for accountability will continue to shape political discourse for generations to come.